Hello, hello. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. I have a really hard topic for us today, but in true fashion, as we do on this podcast, we are going to address the hard things. So hang in there with me. If you are joining me on YouTube or Rumble, thank you. And if you are not, you're going to have a tough time. I will attempt to describe a video sequence. I am not going to show the whole video sequence. It is very graphic. Uh, for those of you who know, I spent a lot of time, well, not a lot of time, but almost 6 years, actually 6 years in the military. And during that did lots of training around violence, in terms of being able to enact violence, to be violent when the situation dictates. And one of the things that I've learned is that very rarely is it ever actually necessary to be violent. There are moments in this world, I'm not going to lie, where violence is a response that is sometimes necessary. For instance, if you come up on a situation and there is significant violence, sometimes the physical act of taking a stand can actually stop the violence. And sometimes that would come with something like you give somebody a push and then you direct your attention appropriately in the right place, and it can de-escalate a situation. And it can protect people. And so it's not a never solution to that violence is never an option or never necessary. But we are going to address this thing that's happening, this fear mongering, and I'm going to take you down a tiny little walk of what that's turning into, because I'm going to invite you into my social media strand a tiny bit for those of you who are interested in following along on Rumble or YouTube. Sorry. And I'm going to let you see it, but then I'm also going to very much go down the actual problem. The video itself, look, I've seen violence. The video itself is, there's a disgusting nature to it because of the follow up, like the after the violence, as well as like the need that the violence probably wasn't even necessary. And I want to point at those things, give you some context as to, from a clinical lens, what I am always considering in situations when we respond or react to different kinds of situations. So unfortunately, it seems that every time I open my social media feed, and today did not let me down, because literally right as I was thinking about this, I'm like, I wonder, I'm getting ready for this podcast. I'm just going to open my feed for Twitter and just see, and no joke, the very top thing on the feed, which is interesting because I don't spend a lot of time responding to these things, in part because the response keeps those videos at the forefront, but I'm not the one keeping them at the forefront. And so I actually clicked on this one because I wanted to get the context to see if it was consistent with some of the other things that I have been seeing. And in fact, it is. So let me, for those of you who are watching, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to share with you a feed that I have, and I'm going to describe it for those of you who are following along. All right. So those of you who are there, you just saw, let me see if I can go back and make it start over. Okay. So boom, kid goes down, gets punched several times. Look at, nobody's around them. I'm scrolling down because it's pretty graphic from there. The kid starts seizing. This happened in a school, like in a cafeteria, and it's a problem. Like clearly the kid got assaulted. Now, I get we don't have context around this, but 0% need for that in that environment. It's just not necessary. We know that could be the case for sure. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for a moment. I will come back to some of those things, but I don't want you to be distracted with my feed if you're watching along. And here's the problem. I'm going to just be really clear with this. We're seeing this stuff, and there is this effort culturally to feed us this violence in order to madden us, to make us fearful or angry. Like, that's what's happening. I'm watching it over and over. That is what is going down. And if you allow people to control your emotions, then it's a you problem. It is not a them problem. It is not a school problem. It is not a government problem. It is a you problem. And I cannot be clearer on that. You must check yourself. If you are getting emotional, and I get emotional, but then I create a gap between the emotion and the response. All right. And am I perfect at it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I make mistakes as well. I made one just last night with my kid, who came in talking about some propaganda as if it were fact. And I was like, that's not fact. And I wanted to throw all the facts at her. But the truth is, that wasn't going to help. So I backed off, I waited, and I came back to it this morning, and she was moderately open. Not as open as I'd prefer, but she's a teenage kid and I'm the dad, and like, I'm not cool. And so that makes sense. I get it. All right. That there's only going to be so much openness there, but she heard me. Why? Because I didn't just throw it down her throat. Like, take this, kid. No, like I went, wait a minute. I'm having an emotional reaction, and she's emotionally reacting to my emotional reaction. She thinks she's right. I get it. I've been young before, and I thought I was right about lots of things. And sometimes I wasn't. Sometimes I was straight up wrong. So in a situation like this, they're inciting an emotional reaction, generally attempting to incite fear or anger. Now, those of you who are following along, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to let us back into that scroll. Hopefully that wasn't too distracting. But I want to go into some of the other pieces of that. Okay. And that is the responses. Now, I don't know these people. All right. I would sign a petition for homeschooling. Okay. Moving on. How would destroying public schools to benefit the wealthy prevent this? I don't even know where that guy's going with that. But here we go with Brandon. Let's Go Bridges, Doctor of Rob or whatever, says context. What happened before the video started? Now, in the eyes of the law, totally relevant. But the eyes of social contracts, social agreements, who the hell cares? Nobody cares about context. What we care about is somebody literally leaped out and assaulted another human being. So I ask, context. What, like, don't get me wrong, legally, that's necessary. But in terms of this behavior, it's not about context. It's about this should never happen. Okay, we move on. Let's go to, I have this, Melissa thinks this is bad, but school shootings, not so much. All right. See how people are turning this into a driving agenda of their own. These are people emotionally reacting. These are not well thought out, most likely. Now, maybe there was lots of thought in this. I don't know. But most likely that is inciting emotion. It's saying, oh, well, you think this is bad? Guns are way worse. Like, we know where that's going. All right. Well, it could also be they're trying to incite emotion to get clicks and all that kind of stuff. There's all these subcategories of why people want to emotionally incite things. But this isn't about the schools at all. This could happen in your neighborhood, on the sidewalk. It could happen in the mall. It could happen anywhere. And it's not the school's fault necessarily. Now, sometimes schools, they have a responsibility to create a certain climate and culture. I agree with that. And some of them are doing a great job, and some of them are doing absolutely piss poor work on that. I get it. And yes, is that an angle that you want to consider for your own children? Absolutely. But that is a turn of the tide. The reality is this is an assault, a behavior which society should not say ever that's justified. We just shouldn't, almost ever. I can't imagine a scenario where assaulting somebody is the justified response. But I leave myself a little bit of room because why? Because, there is moments where a physical altercation could be a de-escalating of behaviors and violence. And in those situations, that might be an appropriate response. Okay, so then I move down, and then we see this is a bullying, and then we see the context, and then we go, there's things about parenting in here. I've scrolled through a bunch, so I don't know if I'm going to hit all of them. This is bad, but school shootings, ignoring the obvious question all along. For those of you who are following on the video, you got to see a few extra things, but ignoring the obvious thing, which is this ought not ever happen in our culture. So we have a cultural problem. And that cultural problem is we are glorifying and glamorizing violence for our own benefit. The chances are, unfortunately, I hate this about it, and I'm going to be really clear. The fact that I put this video on here will probably, and I didn't even show the whole thing, the kid on the ground starts seizing afterwards, like literally seizing, because he was attacked so violently. And chances are many of you will actually go and visit my Rumble or YouTube and see the video. Which I get. I'm not doing this for clicks. I'm doing this for context and for conversation. We need to be fixing this cultural problem. Now, there's the other side of the house. Like most of these, let's be real, that have come up lately, most of them have created a racial context. It's a black on black, a white on white, a white on black, and they go down that pathway of the racial context. And it's creating a racism, a new racism. Now, I'm not saying that there hasn't always been racism. There has, since the beginning of time, essentially. We've had segregated communities. People of the same kind live together, and it's pretty easy to tell when somebody is black or somebody is white. Much of the time, not always. Right? It's 2023. There's a lot of people who are mixed, and you cannot tell, and yet we're like inciting fear and anger to push an agenda. And unfortunately, what it's pushing is people more into racism, not less. Like I'm watching it happen right in front of me. I hear stuff about race a lot more. And look, I don't want to shove it under the carpet. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'll go into what to do. That's next. But the fact that we're we have to address this, but the way in which we're doing it is perpetuating the violence, it's perpetuating the racism, it's perpetuating the hate for schools and school teachers, and not all of them are good. I would love for a system that got rid of teachers that were crappy teachers. But we don't have that. We have union systems. They're not going to get rid of crappy teachers. The union is there to protect the crappy teachers. Like that is what we have built. If we want that to be different, let's go after that. But not all schools are bad. Not even all public schools, right? Not all private schools are good. or bad. Not all charter schools are good or bad. Not all homeschools are good or bad, right? Like we just can't be lumping it as in an all. We've got to see them uniquely. If this particular school is a terrible school, then somebody needs to insert, like I've done that work. I worked in a public school system for almost 6 years because they had a gang violence problem. And why they chose me, because I worked in residential programming with a bunch of gangs. I had been in the military. They were like, no, all right, we'll give this guy a shot. And I went in and it made a difference. We worked on the climate and the culture. And we reduced the gang activity in and around the school, not eliminated it. I'm not here to like make it sound like we were creating a miracle, but we reduced it massively, which made gang members more likely to attend school. We watched that happen. We watched the data, and kids who previously had been involved in gangs got in an altercation would stop coming to school. By the end, they'd be involved in an altercation and they would come back. Why? Because overall they felt safe at the school and they kept going. Now, we wanted to do that specifically because we knew the longer they were in schools, the better off they're going to be. So we move on. What do we do about this? What do we do about all of this? I'm going to give you some options. They are not all going to work for you, but I do encourage you to explore them. Number one, if what you're going to post is designed or comes from an emotional place, pause. Save the tweet. Don't do it right away. Come back to it. There's a little feature for that, by the way. You hold the little bird and it pops up your old tweets, the ones that you haven't submitted yet. So you could sit on it for an hour. Just try it. Close out the tweet and it'll say, do you want to save this for later? Yes. And then you wonder where it goes. Well, next time you go to tweet, hold the little blue bird and all of a sudden 3 options come up and you can pick one. And one of those is your old tweets. You can pull it up and go, oh, that's what I was writing. Let me go back and see where I am on that now. Save your tweet, do it later. Okay. Stop the cycle of spreading these videos and all the nasty stuff that comes after that, unless you're going to do it from a place of care and kindness for all parties. Look, that kid on the ground ended up being a victim no matter how you paint it. Now, was the kid that attacked him a victim of some other kind? Maybe context does matter socially, but the violence shouldn't have been the next part. That's an escalation. And contractually, we say of like kind. So unless that kid that was on the ground seizing at the end had beat the crud out of that other kid the day before or the week before, that's not like kind. And if that happened, there should have been some other alternative, right? Like we got to get smarter. We got to get smarter. When you're participating in these conversations, my encouragement, speak to the sadness, the real authentic sadness of a situation ever becoming like that. Stop framing that in anger. Look, we know anger is secondary. You've seen my other posts on emotional regulation. You've got the bull down at the bottom catching all those crappy emotions that are overflowing. We know that by the time it gets to anger, it's a lack of control. And if we know that, we have to speak out against all hate, emotional hate, spiritual hate, physical hate, creating environments of hate. We have to speak out against all of it. So when you see stuff like that, speak to the sadness of it, not to, and you speak out the hate of it. Like, I don't hate that kid. Something caused that kid to, and truthfully, it might be cultural, It might be spiritual. It might be individually psychological. He might be hurting. Does that make it right? Absolutely not. But there's a story behind it. And you all like context, context, context. You heard me bash that in some ways. Like, look, yes, context matters legally. Yes, context matters socially in some ways, but not all ways. That violence should not occur. So in that sense, context doesn't matter. That shouldn't have happened. Start with the sadness, go to the anger, then let's get the context. Like, address them that way, address them authentically. And then offer other solutions. Offer other solutions to this crap and violence. You know, say, look, what are the, literally, maybe even pose the questions on these things. What other options did that kid have? He could have walked away. And if he walked away and been attacked, because, you know, clearly they were facing each other. There was some sort of confrontation of sorts probably going on, even if one side didn't even know it. They were facing each other, whatever. But there's other choices. There's other choices. We don't have to escalate from words to violence, from emotions to violence. We don't have to have a thought and just enact it. Here, let me paint a picture how crazy that is. Driving down the freeway. Often somebody says, how will I know if I'm crazy? Like, people ask that of therapists. I don't know why. They just do. They say, well, I say, okay, well, look, you're driving down the road. You have this thought, I wonder what it would be like if I turned my wheel and ended up in that big giant piece of concrete between this side of the freeway and the other side of the freeway. That's a thought. All right. You just keep driving along. No big deal. We have thoughts that are nutty all the time, emotions that are nutty all the time. But then replay that. There's a giant wall of concrete right there. I wonder what would happen if I ran into it. Bam, you pull the wheel, boom, crash, bam, car's going crazy. The difference between crazy and not crazy is take a moment. It's literally, most of the time, it's take a moment. That's what I've got for you today, folks. I know sometimes I'm a little intense like this, so I hope you appreciate it. And thanks for joining us. Please subscribe, follow, do all those good things that help keep us going. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.